And I'm so excited to welcome you to our virtual opera and conversation, where we'll be talking about The Marriage of Figaro, which is a show we'll be doing in Opera Omaha in the next season. And so I'm so excited to have with us our conductor, Stephen White, and Opera Omaha's head of music, Sean Kelly, as we dive into what makes Mozart's music and this opera so memorable and popular and fabulous, and what we're looking forward to as part of that production. So right now we're recording and it's live and we're here on Facebook. So make sure that if you have questions throughout the conversation, pop them in the comments and I will make sure to add them into our conversation live with Stephen and Sean. And we'll take it away from there. So the first place to start, Stephen, is let's remind everybody a little bit of what's the story of Marriage of Figaro. Who are our main characters that we'll be seeing?
Well, the story of Marriage of Figaro is extremely complicated at one level. All kinds of small little plot intricacies that lots of people who've seen Marriage of Figaro over and over again still don't know what it's all about, about who wrote what note to whom and what's with the pen and all that kind of stuff. But the basic plot is quite understandable. I'm gonna let Sean weigh in on this. He's good at breaking things down to their into their nuts and bolts. Sean, you want to give a little plot summary, super quick?
This is one of the trickier operas to distill down into an elevator speech.
Exactly, which is why I'm asking you to do it instead of me.
And when I make the plot point, and I know I will, I'll let Steven chime in.
All right, yeah, good.
So in in the spirit of excellent theater, this is something that takes place within a 24-hour period. And it's the morning of Figaro and Susanna's wedding. And we find Figaro measuring on the floor, measuring their the bridal suite, their bedroom. And Susanna comes in and she said, well, what are you doing? He said, oh, well, the Count has given us a bed and I'm measuring to see where it can fit in the room. And she's like, in this room? Absolutely not. And Figaro doesn't understand why. And she said, don't you realize he's trying to be physically close to me so that whenever he wants, he'll send you away and he can just creep into my room. And Figaro's like, what? I thought he abolished the
droit de seigneur.
Yeah, the right that the Lord has to sleep with whoever gets married on their wedding night. And Susanna says, well, he did abolish it, but now he kind of is repentant, and he likes me. And Figaro's like, well, no, this isn't going to happen. And if the Count wants to play a game, I can play a game too. And then we see Marcellina and Bartolo, and Marcellina has a crush on Figaro, and she wants Bartolo, who's a doctor and kind of a powerful person in the town, in the castle, to help her. So Figaro doesn't get his dowry, so he's forced to marry her and not Susanna. So Marcellina, at this point, just has a crush on Figaro. And Bartolo says, yes, I'm going to help you, and if Figaro did me wrong in the past, and I'm going to have my vengeance. And so we kind of meet these four characters so far. And then Basilio, who is a music teacher and of course a terrible gossip, is always creeping around and is always listening to everything. He comes,
as music teachers are wont to be. Remember that.
And he comes in, he's like, oh, hello, Susanna, how are you? Have you seen the Count? She said, well, why would I have seen the Count? What I don't have anything to do with the Count. He's like, well, you know how much the Count loves you. And Susanna says, listen, I don't have any time for your gossip. All you do is spread lies. Just leave me alone. Cherubino is a horny teenager who loves not just the Countess. He has the biggest crush on the Countess, but he loves Susanna. He loves any girl that sits still long enough for him to see them. He comes in, and so Cherubino has to hide. Basilio should hide. The Count comes in. It's already confusing, and we're already like 30 minutes into the opera. And so everybody hides, and the Count comes in, and he reveals his love for Susanna. And everyone hears it. And then Cherubino's hiding behind a chair, and then the Count tries to sit in the chair, and the Cherubino moves, and it's this very cute physical comedy thing that's built into the music. It's not, you know, Mozart tells us what to do in this. And so there's a really cute trio where Cherubino's hiding and the Count is trying to sit where Cherubino, and Susanna knows everybody's in the room but doesn't let on. Oh, geez. Then the Countess and Susanna are talking, and the Countess says, you know, Susanna, it just breaks my heart that he is still so unfaithful. I can't believe he's trying to seduce you. And Susanna says, I know. And she said, I think I have a plan on how to get him back. And Figaro comes in the room, and the three of them, Figaro kind of reveals the plot to them of how they're going to get their revenge. And the revenge is to have the Count caught red-handed by his wife, trying to seduce someone who's not his wife. So she can say, listen, you're wrong. Everybody has seen you do this. You're a creep. So that's the plan. And so they write a note to Figaro. It says, meet, and he thinks it's from Susanna. Meet me in the garden.
They write a note to the Count.
To the Count.
Yeah.
From Susanna, but the Countess is helping her write it. Meet me in the garden, under the pine trees. And you can have we'll be alone. Wink, wink, wink. Another note is written, not by Susanna and the Countess, that is telling the Count that the Countess is going to meet her lover in the garden. And so he is going to go to one corner of the garden to have his escapade, but then he thinks he's going to catch the Countess. And then the Countess and Susanna switch like coats because it's dark. And that's the trap. In the meantime, everything else you can imagine happens. Cherubino gets stuck, tries to jump out of a window, tramples the carnations. Antonio, the drunk gardener, sees somebody running and gets mad that his carnations are trampled on. Figaro says it was him to get Cherubino out of the picture. And Antonio doesn't buy it, even though he's kind of drunk. He says, oh, it looked like it was a little boy, but okay. So this all culminates at the end of the Act 2 finale, which is the most brilliant piece of music ever written. And Mozart, as a genius as he is, starts out, it's two people talking, and the next movement is three people talking, and the next movement is four people, and it just builds and builds, and there's quick tempo and slow tempi, and it's just brilliant. And then in the second, Acts 3 and 4, we kind of see how everything plays out, and who gets caught and who doesn't get caught, and who is forgiven and who is not forgiven. And it's just spectacular.
Yeah, and there's just so much to it that you know, it sounds like, I mean, it sounds like it is very, very confusing, but it's confusing but not in a frustrating kind of way. It's that there's so much there, there's so much plot to sink yourself into. And Mozart and Da Ponte, who have taken this plot from Beaumarchais, which is even more involved, people have to realize that there is, you know, you can count on one hand the number of operas where the libretto is ingenious, where the music is genius, and where the original source material is genius. This is why pieces like Otello stick out, for example, because all three of those elements were there. And in this particular piece, Beaumarchais wrote one of the great masterpieces of 18th century French literature in this piece, and Da Ponte and Mozart even more so. And it's just an endless wealth just on the plot aspect alone. It's just so great. My favorite plot twist that I don't think you mentioned, but I think is tremendously fun, is when Figaro finds out that Marcellina is his mother and Bartolo is his father.
Spoiler alert! I didn't want to.
Oh, spoiler alert! Oh, my bad.
You know what? We'll edit that out later.
Okay,
and
edit that out.
and it'll be fine. But also, 300-year-old opera.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Public domain. Public
Yeah,
domain.
absolutely,
I'm
absolutely.
sorry, Sean.
So it sounds like we have all of the comedic tropes in a romantic comedy that could possibly happen with, love and lust and marriage and mistaken identities and, all sorts of hijinks ensue, as we like to say. So one of the big things that we talked about when we were preparing for this conversation was this idea of, with all these characters that we have, there's also the really important role that also comes up in the music of the class differentiation and that upstairs kind of downstairs life that is happening in the opera.
Well,
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm very happy to, and really to start looking at this, from the very beginning with this piece, you really sort of have to look at the Beaumarchais itself. When this piece was written, it was censored in France and was not allowed to be performed. Finally, there were some private performances of this before it became allowed to be performed publicly. But that was because of this relationship between the high class, the gentry, the royalty, if you will, and the servant class. And very unusual and provocative at the time. Remember, this was written in 1784. I'm talking about the Beaumarchais, which is the year before Mozart started to, and Da Ponte started to work on it. But it was extremely provocative to have a servant class group of characters outwitting a group of gentry and royalty. And just 5 and 6 years before the French Revolution, you can sort of see why, particularly in France, this was something that they thought was a little bit dangerous. Well, Mozart and Da Ponte built on that. What's amazing is the fact that in the world of opera, you already had a sort of a musical language that was associated with either one of these classes to begin with. The upper class, whether it's royalty or whether it's wealth, was almost always depicted in an opera seria kind of manner. Opera seria is the term for serious opera. You think of Handel's operas, and many of them, most of them, were opera seria. As a matter of fact, Mozart's first important opera, Idomeneo, was an opera seria based on mythological or historical plots. And the music has an almost Baroque kind of quality, much more old-fashioned, if you will, than the music that is associated with a servant class. And opera buffa, which is what this is, Mozart's opera is an opera buffa, was fairly new at that time, where people were beginning to explore this new musical comedy kind of idea. People were starting to get a little bit weary of the same old gods and the same old goddesses and the same old ancient dead monarchs. So opera buffa had become something that was much more gaining in popularity, and the musical style of the characters was more relatable, for lack of better terminology. So when you're doing a story, when you're like this particular story is, that has both, it gives you an opportunity to paint music, different styles of music for each sets of characters. And what Mozart did was he made very clear who was who based on the style of music. We could point that out in a number of ways. One of the most obvious ways that's rather easy is the fact that oftentimes in an opera seria, when there's a moment of high emotion, the singer, the character will go from, as opposed to just doing accompanied recitative, which we associate with the harpsichord and all that, all of a sudden, because of this heightened emotion, will be given an accompanied recitative, an arioso, okay, accompagnato. And the countess gets one of these, The only aria that the Count gets has one of these. The other characters do not, except for two exceptions. In the last act, when Susanna, spoiler alert, when Susanna is pretending to be the Contessa, she gets a small little accompanied recitative associating herself with Mozart, associating herself in disguise with this kind of thing. And then something I think that's really interesting is that Figaro, who is a new kind of opera buffa character. He's not just he's not you know, a Papageno type or some kind of mere comic character. He really sort of becomes a working class hero, if you will, and almost an enlightened everyman. And when he sings his final aria in the last act, Mozart gives him an accompanied recit. What does that mean? It means to me that he's promoting him. He is saying at a certain level that he has taken from the music, he has taken Figaro out of the mere squalorous depths of being, you know, a lower class person, but has demonstrated by the way he's treating him a degree of enlightenment and turning him into a working class hero, for lack of better terminology. And one could go on and on about the kinds of music. Often when we've got the peasants that come in, for example, it sounds like almost like peasant music. It's very workaday folk music-like, whereas the music for the Contessa is unbelievably refined. The music even for the Count is refined, even in his anger. It's exceptionally refined music, as opposed to a more straightforward kind of warmth that you find in the other characters. If that makes sense.
Great. It does make sense. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that's so brilliant about this piece is that each of the characters, you learn so much about them and their role within the world of the opera with the style of music that they get and these little gifts that Mozart gives each of the characters. Sean, can you talk a little bit about which of the characters, you know, and who we're going to be seeing in this production, the casting, but also, you know, when you have these relationships amongst the characters, we've talked a lot about those are considerations that you take into account when you're talking about casting the opera.
Sure. So I'll go down the cast list briefly, and then we'll talk about kind of the relationships they have from the Beaumarchais into the Ponte. So we have Zachary Nelson and Mary Feminier are the Count and Countess. Annie Rosen is singing Cherubino. And Mary and Annie were with us 2 seasons ago during the one festival for the Ariodante and the Wreck. They're two performances that we did 2 seasons ago. Rod Nelman and Vicky Lavengood are singing Bartolo and Marcellina. Vicky was last here in Flight, so 4 seasons ago. Michael Kuhn, who is just here last season with us singing Pedrillo in Abduction from the Seraglio, is coming to do a double role as Basilio and Curzio. So Basilio is the music teacher in the first half, and then the Curzio is the lawyer, notary, and he has a stutter, which is always funny. And Vanessa Becerra and Brian Wu, of course, the power couple of the evening, Susanna and Figaro. So Vanessa, this will be her 3rd production with us. She was here first in Medea, and then last season she was in Les Enfants Terribles, and now she's joining us for her first Susanna. So it's going to be fantastic. And Brian Wu is making his debut with Opera Omaha.
That's great.
So yeah, the one thing that we really wanted to bring to the forefront was the idea that the Count and the Countess and Figaro and Susanna are all of a very similar age, and you know they would be friends. They are friends. But destiny has made the Count and the Countess nobility, and Figaro and Susanna are servant class. But if you think of the Barber of Seville by Rossini, so even though it's a later opera, it comes first in the trilogy of the stories. Figaro and the Count were buddies. Figaro is the reason the Count is the Count. He helps them. He introduces the Count and the Countess. So we really wanted to have this idea of like peers and a collegial relationship. And so we kind of went out of our way to have these four singers be of a similar age. A lot of times you'll see the Countess as this, 60-year-old woman with a powdered wig, and then Susanna is the cute little soubrette. They're much closer. They're much more peers than that. I believe.
May I just throw something in there, particularly about the Contessa? If there's only a 3-year difference, 3 years between Barbara of Seville, when Rosina, the Contessa, the Contessa, was presumably as young as 15 when she was the ward of Don Bartolo, which would make her at this point 18. Certainly not much older than that. And we of course never think of it that way, but one of the things that I think is so interesting and makes the whole plot much more believable is that if we were to look at it from our viewpoint, these kids are getting married way too soon. Okay, I'm talking specifically about Almaviva and Rosina. Okay, looking at Barbara Seville, you don't particularly someone like the Count. He's not ready for this, and so it makes more sense. Figaro generally is thought to have been probably around 30 years old, older than the Count, and so. What's great about what Sean is saying is actually it's a very Mozartian kind of way. When you look very specifically as Sean is talking about in casting an opera, Mozart wrote his pieces. Mozart wrote his music for specific singers, taking into account not just their vocal abilities but their demeanors and who they are. So I very much appreciate the kind of studied way in which Sean and Roger cast here at Omaha. That's one of the real strengths of this company, in my view.
Well, and it's going to be really exciting to welcome back some of those artists that we've had here before, and we know from previous seasons. So I know we'll have many in our audience who will be excited to see those folks back. And Steven, you've been here in Omaha before and worked with Opera Omaha and with.
I have several times, and it's absolutely one of my favorite experiences as a musician, and I'm not making that up, to work in Omaha for a variety of reasons. Not the least of which is the way Roger and the whole company shows total respect to the community of Omaha by insisting on excellence in every way. That was evident to me from the very first time I worked there, which was Rigoletto some years ago, and then I did the Barber of Seville, and I've done Così and Faust, our marvelous Faust production, and in every single one of those experiences. The commitment to excellence from a production standpoint, from support that the company gives. One of the things I remember commenting about when I first worked there was that Roger and the other leadership in the company, the rehearsal room is right there as part of the facility, and there's not a day that doesn't go by where Roger and other leaders and other members of the company don't come in and sit in on the rehearsal process and show tremendous support. I've worked in other companies before where they'll wait to see how the public reacts to tell you whether they think you're doing a good job. I've never felt that from Roger, from Sean, or from anyone there. So the commitment to quality at every level is amazing. And I have to say too that working with the Omaha Symphony is one of the great delights that I have as a conductor. They're a wonderful, wonderful orchestra, and the fact that they are the pit band for Omaha Symphony for Opera Omaha is not only wonderful for the opera company, it also makes them a more flexible orchestra, and so I think it pays benefits to both organizations. But I just simply know I I love working with them, and I can't wait to be in Omaha again. I love the company, love all the people there, and always look forward to a tremendously wonderful experience.
Well, we're excited to have you back. Thinking about kind of some of those previous operas that you've done, and actually, this was not one that you did, but that we just did with Opera
Just did
Omaha.
Abduction, yeah.
We just did Abduction, so our audiences are going to be, familiar with that that Mozart comic opera. But Abduction and Figaro, are very different. They represent a lot of musical kind of growth in that format. And what are some of those things that we should be looking for?
Well, I mean, there is stylistic growth, artistic growth, you could say. Mozart, I mean, Abduction is 1782, and Figaro is 1785. So, well, that's only 3 years. But for Mozart, I mean, come on, a lot can happen in 3 years. But that's not to say that there's anything immature at all about Abduction. I mean, it is a great, great mature piece of music. The main difference is that Abduction is a different style of music completely. It's a German Singspiel, which is it's based sung in German, and it's much more what we would sort of associate with a kind of a musical theater kind of thing, vaudeville-ish almost, in a way, where you have spoken dialogue as opposed to accompanied dialogue, or even a dialogue accompanied simply with the harpsichord. But the same kind of love of his characters. I'm always amazed at how Mozart, unlike any other composer, showers love on his characters. Constanza. I mean, first of all, Constanza, I mean, meant a lot to him because it's also the name of his wife, and they had just gotten married. I mean, so we're talking about brand new love that is evident at every single turn with every word that Constanza sings in that opera. But he does the exact same thing in Marriage of Figaro. I mean, the way he demonstrates his love for his characters. I mean, take for example, Susanna and Devieni non tardar, which is perhaps as famous and beloved an aria as there is. In the plot, if you're looking at the plot just by itself, it's like, oh, well, she's singing all of this purely to pretend. She's trying to pretend that she's singing this for the count. Well, there's no doubt that that's part of it. But you can tell by the music. You can tell by the music that she's also being sincere in her love for Figaro. And in my estimation, because the music is so beautiful, and because we know Susanna to be such a good person, she would not be wasting such sincere love on a person like in Figaro that himself is not a wonderful person. We can tell that Mozart loves Figaro himself by the way Susanna sings to him. Okay, and those are the kinds of things. Those are the kinds of subtleties that you have in Mozart that are endless and that are so rewarding, and that you can go to your grave cherishing and finding more examples of it.
I'm really excited to see and hear all of this, as we're talking about that musical love for the characters and all of that. I want to do another reminder that if you have questions for us to talk about in this opera conversation, pop those in the comments on Facebook, and we'll throw them in, and I'll make sure to ask Stephen and Sean for your questions about that. So talking about those characters and that love that Mozart has for it, and that comes through in the music, what are some of the other things that make this opera one of people's favorites, one of the most kind of beloved operas, one of the most popular, with those pieces that everybody kind of clings to?
Well, I mean, the sheer ebullience of the music. I mean, there are, I believe, 28 numbers in an uncut production, 28 concerted numbers. Of those 28, all but 2 are in a major key. Barberina's short little aria in the last act is in F minor, and the the Countess, I mean, the Count Susanna duet starts out in A minor and quickly goes to A major. So you've got an entire opera in a major key. And you might think, oh my Lord, that's just gonna be so boring. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's just so overwhelmingly ebullient from beginning to end. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful ways to say it, I think, because I think it's evident from the music itself. But when you look at the structural detail and the structural intelligence that Mozart, and with Da Ponte's help, have constructed this piece, and we don't have to go into great detail, but the things that musicologists and I love to do are look at the key relationships that you know, from one progression to the next, and how they work together and what they symbolize. There are even leitmotifs in this piece. They're very subtle. It's not like Wagner, but every time we see Cherubino, we hear, and when made the fatal mistake, when he is introduced, with the first aria, Non so più, we have this da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Every time we hear it throughout the entire opera, when Cherubino is being referenced, you'll hear ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. This little tripping little motive is just 3 notes, but it's an indication, a subtle indication of his character. You know, Sean mentioned the unbelievable magnificence of the ensembles. I mean, there are so many. I mean, the arias are great. You know, we absolutely adore the arias. But it is the ensembles that really separate it from the crowd in a way that is unbelievable. By the time he wrote that first act trio, nothing like that had ever been written before. Sean was describing all of the comic physical stuff, and it's just incredible. But the music does all of that, and it does it with such beauty. Okay, the Mozart had the ability to take something absurd and keep the absurdity, but making it beautiful at the same time. You know, usually you don't associate absurdity with beauty. Mozart is the one musician in human history that was able to make absurdity and even farcical situations. Take Così fan tutte, for example. Take the whole aria. It's farcical situations, and make it sublimely beautiful in the most artistic and elegant kind of way. I found talking about ensembles, and specifically about the finales. I want to read something that I found earlier today. This is Da Ponte talking about what he believed a really good finale should be. And he talked about how wonderful it was that Mozart was able to achieve this. This finale, I'm quoting Da Ponte here, which must remain intimately connected with the opera as a whole, is nevertheless a sort of little comedy or operetta all by itself, and requires its own plot and an unusually high pitch of interest. The finale must chiefly glow with the genius of the conductor. Love that part. I mean, he said it. It must glow with the genius of the conductor, the ability of the singers, and the grandeur of the dramatic effect. And it's the truth that you look at the second act finale, it's an opera by itself. You look at the last act finale, and it's an opera by itself. You look at that trio that I was just talking about. That is a little opera in and of itself. And that's the thing that is overwhelming about Mozart, is that the intensity of his focus on detail is such that it doesn't in any way interfere with the arc of the whole. You know, I would imagine it's like in a certain way, it's like taking a telescope and you know, looking into the heavens, and you see all this many number of stars and all these wonderful things, and then you turn up the intensity and all of that, and all of a sudden you can see 1,000 more stars, and then you do it again, and there's another. But that doesn't mean that when you look just with your naked eyes up at the sky, it's just as beautiful. I mean, it's that's Mozart. I mean, there he is. There's Mozart.
guest in our opera and conversation.
Yeah.
So a question came in, and Stephen, you've kind of spoken to this, so I'll ask it to Sean. But
Please.
besides, those big finale numbers and those big pieces, are there? Do you have like a favorite, like maybe smaller nugget or something that you particularly enjoy in this piece?
Besides the finales?
Yeah.
Going off of what Stephen just said, he puts so much love and attention into how he paints his characters, even if they didn't sing them, even if it was just the orchestra playing their music, or even if you didn't understand a word of Italian or never heard any of the plot of any of these pieces. If you just had Cherubino come on stage and his first music came, and it's that agitated, the da-da-dun, da-da-dun, and he's out of breath and he's kind of, slightly aroused and nervous and all of the things that like everybody was when they were 13. You get that spirit, whether you understand Italian or not, or whether he's even singing. The orchestra does it. It kind of, the orchestra paints the scene for the text that happens then from the singer's mouth. And every aria in this opera is brilliant. I think, when Figaro, his very first aria, when he finds out that the Count wants to kind of reclaim his right to sleep with Susanna, he sings his first aria, and it's in the musical form that belonged to the nobility. But because Figaro is talking about, oh, you want to dance? I'll play the guitar for you. He's absorbing that characteristic because he's mocking the Count, and he says, if you think you're going to outsmart me, you're wrong. And it's those little details that I think just throughout the whole opera are just brilliant. I mean, the silly, tiniest little duet when Cherubino's trying to hide, and it goes, I mean, you blink and it's over, and the orchestra is like, it's super fast, and
it's so hard, I have to say.
It's so hard, and the faster it goes, the better it is, but then the harder it is. It's brilliant, and it's like 40 seconds long. It's just so for me, every piece of the opera is brilliant, but it's that attention to painting the character and lavishing his love and attention on every little aspect of the character that is absolutely permeates the score.
Something I find really interesting is in both of the Countess's arias, in the Porti Amore that opens the second act, and then the Dove sono of the third act, the text is very sad. I mean, she is mourning, weeping the loss of her love. Both of these arias are in major keys. One of the standard things was that people used to make fun of, musicologists would make fun of Gluck because Che farò senza Euridice is in a major key, but yet it's singing, what am I going to do without, but sung in this major key? No one makes those complaints. I've never heard in my life, oh, Mozart didn't sound sad enough for Dove sono or Porti Amore. No, because it's perfect. Because the emotion is a graded emotion. It is not you hear the sadness in the clarinets. I mean, you don't have to have it in a minor key necessarily. It's amazing, and it's irreplicable. It's irreplicable.
I am so excited to hear all of these moments when we do this production. So I want to do one more call to our Facebook Live watchers. If you have any questions, pop them in. Last call for questions in the comments. And before we go, I'm going to ask these guys one more question. So we've talked a little bit about the music. We've talked, about your favorite pieces. Are there any other fun little kind of Easter eggs in this opera that our audiences should be looking for or listening for, that you think are really special that we haven't talked about yet? I'll start with you, Stephen.
Sean, you want to go first? You want to go first? Okay, good. I'm fine. I'm good. There are lots of Easter eggs. You have a whole Easter egg hunt. But one of the things that I think is so clever, we've referred to the first act trio several times. At one point in that trio, Don Basilio once they make the accusation that Susanna is being flirtatious and what she shouldn't be, which of course she's not. She's a paragon of virtue, but they're accusing her of being licentious. And Don Basilio sings, "Così fan tutte le belle." Così. I'm trying to sing it. I can't.
You got it right.
I got it right? Così fan tutte le belle. Anyways, così fan tutte le belle. It means all women are like that. All these beautiful women are. That's what they do. Okay. And that little figure. All right. Okay. Now this is 1785. We have another 5 years before Così fan tutte even hit the brain of Mozart or Da Ponte. Yet Mozart took that little phrase of Da Ponte's libretto and turned it into the name of that final that final Da Ponte opera. And not only that, but took that phrase of music, and that is the thematic material of the overture to Così fan tutte. So it is an incredible inside joke between Da Ponte and Mozart, and to anyone who happened, by the time we get to 1790, to have been familiar enough with Marriage of Figaro. Likely they were not, because Marriage of Figaro was never popular in Vienna in Mozart's lifetime. It wasn't until he performed it in Prague where it became popular, and then they later started, but it was never as popular as Don Giovanni. But that little thing is just brilliant to me. So, your turn, Sean.
Oh, mine is a lot less obvious. In the beginning of the opera, when Susanna and the Countess are with Cherubino, and Cherubino's already kind of gotten himself into trouble, and the Count has, the Count catches him with all the girls in the castle. But why is the Count on his way to see all the girls in the castle? Because the Count is just a grown-up Cherubino, really. Just get that out there. But Cherubino just gets on the Count's nerves, and he keeps getting caught alone with these girls as the Count is going to be alone with these girls. And so Cherubino's in trouble, and the Susanna and the Countess and Cherubino are together, and they're kind of coming up with their scheme. And Susanna makes this kind of comment that you don't necessarily pay attention to. That's, oh, Cherubino, everything he does really well. It's just kind of, yeah, because he's a smart little guy, and he's very sly, and he kind of gets in and out of sticky situations all the time. Then later on in the opera, towards the end, Figaro is upset with Susanna because he thinks she is being unfaithful with the Count, and Figaro kind of off the cuff says, "Oh, Susanna, everything she does, she does well because she's sneaky and she outwits Figaro throughout the course of the opera as well." And that's just a cute little thing that they. It's almost a compliment. It's not even an insult, but.
Well, I love all of these Easter eggs that we'll keep an eye and an ear out for as we go get closer to the production. So, for anything else that we didn't, there's so much to talk about this opera. So we could do this for 2 hours. So yeah. A day for a while.
I do want to say one other thing, if I might. And that has to do with the quality of the recitative, the secco recitativo. I just had the privilege recently of conducting La Clemenza di Tito, which was written after Marriage of Figaro. It's an opera seria. Mozart did not write the recits for that. His friend and colleague Süssmayr, the same guy who finished the Requiem, in the version that most of us know it, is the one that wrote those recits because Mozart wrote the entire opera in a carriage from Vienna to Prague, and you know, in a matter of days. And so he assigned Zeus Myers to do that. The difference between Mozart's recitativo and anyone else's is unbelievable. What keeps Clemenza di Tito from being a completely thorough masterpiece from beginning to end, every note of the piece, is not the music that Mozart wrote, it's the music he didn't write. It's those recits. But the wit and the just the mercurial quality of Da Ponte and Mozart in setting these recits that really move the plot along are second to none. I mean, it's one of the great glories of the musical canon is the way in which Mozart writes these recits, and they're on display in all three of the great Da Pontes, but never more endearingly, in my view, than in Marriage of Figaro.
More things to look forward to. Sean, is there anything else that we haven't covered in today's conversation that you really want audiences to know about before, you know, as they think about this production?
No, I think it's the timelessness of Mozart, and yes, it takes place in a different century, and yes, we don't necessarily have the different classes that we do. Those problems are the same problems that we have in 2020, the same problems we had in 1820 and in 1920. It's timeless. The humanity with which he creates his characters and tells his stories, and then the sense of forgiveness that is just so cathartic at the end of his operas. So all of these machinations and all that, and then that sense of forgiveness at the end is just so timeless that you don't even notice that you've been sitting in the theater for 3 hours. It's just beautiful, and I can't wait for everyone to experience this with us.
Great. Steven, any closing thoughts or words from you about this opera? And
just gratitude. You know, I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to do this several times, and I'm grateful for, you know, I'm just grateful that this piece exists in our world. You know, there are certain things that to me are proof of divinity, and Mozart and Le Nozze di Figaro are certainly one of them. I mean, it's just great, and I'm so grateful to be able to be doing it with you folks in Omaha. It's a dream come true.
Well, great. Well, we're looking forward to it. So thank you both to Steven White and Sean Kelly for joining me for tonight's virtual opera in conversation. And we look forward to sharing Marriage of Figaro with you in the future. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening. And we'll see you in virtual Opera Omaha land soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.